So college students are uniquely impacted by really a nationwide shortage of housing because in many of these college towns, the universities or the market where these universities are haven't created enough housing to really support a growing student body. So
What happens if the student housing shortage continues? If the UK's student housing shortage continues, its effects will spread far beyond campuses and reshape local housing markets permanently. Students will increasingly compete with families, young, professionals, and low-income renters for standard private rentals, intensifying demand in already overstretched areas. This competition pushes rents higher across entire cities, not just student neighborhoods, making affordability worse for everyone. Universities will also face consequences. Institutions that rely heavily on international students may struggle to recruit if accommodation becomes unreliable or unaffordable. Deferred enrollments, higher dropout rates, and reputational damage are real risks when students arrive without secure housing. Education stops being accessible when basic living conditions cannot be guaranteed. For students themselves, the pressure becomes financial and academic. Overcrowding increases as multiple students share properties designed for families. Long commutes become normal as students move further from campus. Stress, debt, and part-time work hours rise, directly affecting academic performance and well-being. Inaction locks in scarcity. Once cities adapt to crisis-level demand, reversing it becomes far harder and far more expensive. Number 9. Why new student housing isn't being built fast enough. Despite clear and growing demand, new student housing in the UK is not being built at the pace required to stabilize the market. One major barrier is planning. Purpose-built student accommodation projects often face strong local opposition, with residents arguing that developments strain infrastructure or change neighborhood character. These objections delay approvals for years, even in cities where shortages are well documented. Finally, regulatory uncertainty discourages investment. Proposed rent controls, planning reforms, and tax changes create risk, causing developers to delay decisions. The result is predictable. Demand rises quickly, supply lags badly, and shortages become entrenched. Number 8. The impact on local renters. The student housing shortage does not affect students in isolation. It spills directly into the wider rental market, intensifying pressure on local renters. When purpose-built accommodation is unavailable or unaffordable, students move into standard private rentals. This shifts competition into neighborhoods that were never designed to absorb large, seasonal demand surges. Local renters are often outbid. Students, particularly when supported by loans, parents, or group pooling, can offer higher rents or pay months up front. Landlords respond rationally by prioritizing these tenants, knowing properties will be filled quickly with minimal vacancy risk. This drives up rents for everyone and reduces availability for long-term residents. Ultimately, the housing crisis deepens. Students do not cause the shortage, but when housing supply fails to match demand, their presence accelerates pressure in markets that were already fragile. Number 7. Cities under the most strain. The student housing shortage is not evenly distributed across the UK. It is concentrated in specific cities, where university expansion has far outpaced housing delivery. Cities such as London, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Nottingham, and Leeds experience the most acute pressure because they combine large student populations with already tight rental markets. In these locations, even small increases in student numbers can have outsized effects on availability and rent levels. What makes these cities especially vulnerable is overlapping demand. Students compete not only with one another, but with young professionals, key workers, and migrant populations, all chasing a limited supply of private rentals. When vacancy rates fall close to zero, landlords gain maximum leverage, and rents escalate rapidly across entire districts. Number 6. International students and demand pressure. International students play a significant role in intensifying the UK's student housing shortage, not because of their presence alone, but because of how the system accommodates them. UK universities have increasingly relied on international enrollments for financial stability, expanding intake far faster than housing capacity. Unlike domestic students, international students almost always require accommodation immediately upon arrival, removing any flexibility in demand. Many international students arrive weeks before term starts, competing early for a limited pool of housing. With fewer local connections and greater urgency, they are often willing or forced to pay higher rents, offer advance payments, or accept poorer conditions just to secure a room. This behavior, driven by necessity rather than choice, pushes market prices upward for everyone. The issue is not international students themselves, but misalignment. Recruitment strategies are national and aggressive. Housing delivery is local and slow. Without coordination between universities, councils, and developers, international demand becomes a shock force in an already undersupplied system, accelerating shortages and rent inflation year after year. Number 5. Rising rents and the student cost of living crisis. The student housing shortage has directly fueled a wider cost of living crisis for students, turning accommodation into their single largest financial burden. In many university cities, rent now consumes the majority of a student's maintenance loan before food, transport, or study costs are even considered. This shifts student life from manageable budgeting into persistent financial stress. As rents rise, students are forced to make trade-offs that affect both well-being and academic performance. More take on part-time work during term time, often exceeding recommended hours. Study time declines, fatigue increases, and academic outcomes suffer. Others cut essentials, skip meals, or rely on debt and family support just to get through the year. What makes this crisis acute is its invisibility. Tuition fees are regulated and predictable. Rent is not. Each year brings uncertainty, last-minute searches, and sudden price jumps. For lower-income students, this undermines access to higher education entirely. When housing becomes unaffordable, university stops being a ladder of opportunity and becomes a privilege tied to family wealth. Number 4. Private landlords versus purpose-built housing. The student housing shortage has exposed a growing imbalance between private landlords and purpose-built student accommodation providers. Traditionally, private landlords absorb much of student demand, renting standard homes near campuses. However, rising costs, tighter regulation, and higher compliance burdens have pushed many smaller landlords out of the student market entirely. At the same time, purpose-built student accommodation has expanded, but not in a way that fully solves the problem. These developments are often concentrated in city centers and priced at a premium, targeting higher income and international students. While they add supply, they do so unevenly, leaving large segments of the student population priced out. Landlords who remain in the market respond to scarcity by raising rents, knowing demand is guaranteed. The result is not balance, but polarization. Without coordinated planning that expands affordable student housing at scale, purpose-built schemes and private rentals will continue pulling in opposite directions, worsening shortages rather than resolving them. 3. How students are pushing into family rentals. As student-specific accommodation falls short, students are increasingly pushed into standard family rentals, reshaping local housing markets in the process. Properties that once housed families or long-term renters are now routinely let to groups of students, particularly in neighborhoods close to campuses or transport links. This shift is driven by necessity rather than preference, but its impact is significant. Group rentals allow students to pool resources, making them competitive bidders even as individual affordability declines. Landlords often favor these arrangements because multiple incomes reduce perceived risk and vacancy rates. Over time, this incentivizes the conversion of family homes into shared student properties, shrinking supply for non-student renters. The problem is not students entering these markets, but a system that failed to provide adequate student housing in the first place. Without intervention, This spillover will continue to distort family rental markets year after year. Number 2. Universities expanded faster than housing. One of the core drivers of the student housing shortage is the pace at which universities expanded student numbers without matching investment in accommodation. Over the past decade, universities have increased intake aggressively, driven by competition, funding pressures, and reliance on tuition fees, particularly from international students. Housing, however, was treated as a secondary concern rather than essential infrastructure. In many cases, universities assumed the private rental market would absorb excess demand. This shifted responsibility outward, relying on landlords and developers to provide accommodation without coordination or guarantees. When that supply failed to materialize at scale, shortages became inevitable. On-campus housing has not kept pace. Building student accommodation requires land, capital, and long-term planning, all of which are constrained. Where partnerships with private developers exist, they move slowly and often prioritize premium units to ensure profitability, leaving affordability gaps unaddressed. Until universities are required to align expansion with accommodation capacity either through direct provision or binding development commitments, the student housing shortage will persist regardless of demand management or market adjustments. Number 1. Why the UK has run out of student housing. The UK has run out of student housing because demand has grown faster than every part of the system designed to support it. University enrollments expanded rapidly, driven by domestic participation targets and international recruitment, while housing delivery lagged behind. Accommodation was never scaled as critical infrastructure, even as student numbers became central to university funding models. Planning constraints are a major factor. Student housing developments face resistance from local communities concerned about density, noise, and service pressure. These objections slow approvals, reduce project scope, or block developments entirely. Even when schemes are approved, rising construction costs and financing challenges delay completion. The shortage is not a surprise. It is the outcome of structural decisions made over years. Without coordinated planning that treats student housing as essential infrastructure, the UK will continue running out of rooms long before it runs out of students.